Hello YouTubers. Today I'd like to show you a mount and a device for putting my Garmin Zumo XT navigation unit on my 2019 BMW R1250RT. In the same location, BMW puts the mount cradle for their BMW Navigator unit. In fact, it's mounted to the BMW Nav cradle, which is still in place just as it came from BMW. You can see the Zumo XT mounted here on my first slide, all powered up and ready to ride. You only need 40mm long M4 bolts and 18mm spacers to make it work, and a tool to reach in and get the Zumo disconnected. If you're interested, keep watching and I'll give you all the details. I really like the Zumo XT so far. It's got a big bright screen and pairs well via Bluetooth with my Android phone and Cardo communications device. If you pair the Zumo XT to the Cardo as Phone 2, a tip I got from BMW forums, everything seems to work fine. I can use my phone for music, calls, or podcasts. The Zumo breaks in with navigation instructions, and I can use my Cardo on its DMS network, as they call it, to talk to my wife or riding buddies who have a Cardo or something similar. I've been experimenting with the Garmin Basecamp software on my Mac and downloading the tracks to the Zumo, and thus far I'm extremely pleased with my ability to plan my routes as I want rather than trying to make my phone work for navigation, which I always seem to want to take the shortest path rather than the most fun path. At first I used the mount that Garmin supplied to go on handlebars, which you see here with the cover over the electrical contacts. After only a little use, there were a couple of things I was dissatisfied with. First, it's extremely easy to dismount. You wrap your hand around it with your thumb on the top button you see in this photo, and it pops right off and into your pocket, or someone else's. I didn't see myself ever getting comfortable taking my eyes off the thing. I'd be popping it off at every gas stop. Otherwise, the mount is solid, although it did put a couple of minor blemishes on my weird shaped handlebars, which I'll show you later. The second thing was that this mount location put the unit quite close to my eye. I had to look down and left to see it. Not a huge deal, but I kept looking enviously at the BMW mount cradle right in the center of the dash, in line with where I was looking most of the time to stay safe. I wanted it there. The screw patterns looked similar, so could I make it work? When I tried to fit the Zumo into this spot, it was too wide to fit all the way to the back of the cover that the BMW cradle was mounted on. The sides narrow in to the back, and it held it about a half an inch off the rear of the cover. Maybe I could use spacers. Maybe I could use spacers right on top of the BMW mount cradle so that I don't have to remove, store, and subsequently realize that I've lost the BMW cradle when I go to sell the bike. The horizontal dimension was the same, and the vertical was the same. The Zumo used M4 bolts and looked like the BMW mount cradle was fastened with the same. So I got these boxes of assorted M4 bolts and spacers for M4 bolts on order, hoping I'd find a combination that would work. They were about $13 each, so for $26 I took the leap of trying to find a mounting solution. Turned out to be not that hard. After these came in, and with my son's help, including the photo documentation, I got started. We removed the 4 visible screws and the 2 trim pieces from the windscreen. Then we removed the remaining 2 screws, which had a shoulder on them to fit snugly into the windscreen itself, and stored the windscreen where it wouldn't be damaged. This windscreen reinforcing piece simply lifts off to expose the powered windscreen arms. The cover that the BMW Nav cradle is mounted to is held by 4 fasteners, the 2 silver screws at the top and the 2 black plastic screws at the bottom, as well as 2 buttons which push into rubber grommets. Turn the motorcycle on and raise the powered windscreen to access the black plastic screws. Here you see the 2 buttons on the bottom of the cover which push into the rubber grommets. And this is what the back of the cover looks like. The bolts are fastened with nylock nuts, which we reused. We spread a blanket over the handlebars just in case we dropped anything, and unbolted the ram ball from the Zumo nav mount. We were careful not to lose these washer inserts, which we reused also. In the middle of the mount, you can see the little Phillips head screw that holds the electrical connector in place. We took the screw out and separated the electrical cable from the Zumo mount. We had plenty of cable to reroute it with the contact cover behind the instrument cluster. Then we removed all of the mounting hardware from the BMW nav cradle. The BMW nav cradle stayed in place. Not sure what was holding it, and I didn't investigate since I wanted it to stay anyway. And we routed the Zumo electrical cable, as you see here. These are the parts we use to attach the Zumo cradle to the BMW cradle. That's the 40mm M4 bolt and an 18mm spacer. Here's one photo of how it fits together, with the bolt head fitting in the cavity in the front of the cradle. And another photo of how it all fits together. The black washer you see next to the Zumo cradle is the washer insert you saw earlier. The split ring lock washer and the nylock nut are behind the BMW Nav cradle, which is represented by the arrow, and everything else is in front. The split ring lock washer was included with the box of assorted M4 bolts. We put the little Phillips head screw back into the electrical cable and attached it to the Zumo cradle. We put two diagonally opposed M4 bolts in with the other associated hardware and pushed them into the BMW cradle. And engaged only a couple of threads of the nylocks on top of the split ring, so we'd have some wiggle room to push in the other two bolts and get the spacers in place. Here's the finished product from the rear of the cover, with all four nylocks tightened with full thread engagement and a split ring lock washer for good measure. Here's the finished product from the front and a photo from beneath. I decided I could leave the BMW cradle contacts exposed without risk. The spacer length of 18mm is probably specific to the R1250RT, given the cover that it nestles into. But I think for any BMW Nav cradle, you'd want spacers to keep the BMW cradle distanced from the Zumo cradle. I suppose it would work regardless of the BMW cradle location if you have room for the larger Zumo XT navigation device. In this photo, the cover is reattached and the Zumo XT is snapped onto the cradle. It feels like a good solid mount. However, one thing to be aware of is that the good news, you can't reach your finger in there to push the button to disconnect the Zumo. Security concern significantly reduced. The bad news is that now I have to keep a tool with the bike to remove it. I've got it wired directly to the battery, so I'll need to do this at least once a day while using it. The tool I'm using for now at least is this auto trim removal tool. It's perfect to get behind the Zumo and push on the disconnect button. Just put the tool right behind the Zumo and push up against the cover for leverage, and it pops right off. While tidying up, I removed the Garmin supplied mount, and I saw I had put a couple of small blemishes on my handlebars. Not noticeable unless you know to look for them. I'd really tightened the two nuts on the U-bolt supplied by Garmin since I couldn't get full thread engagement. I should have gotten a longer U-bolt and put a piece of rubber behind it, but I didn't take the time initially to do it. So this is the bike all put back together and how it looks with the Zumo cradle bolted to the BMW Nav cradle. This is a view from the top with the Zumo attached. I've taken a ride already and used it once, and it's much easier to see and used in this location. The handlebar location worked, but this is a definite improvement. I can still reach it easily when I'm on the bike, but of course I'd never do that while moving since that'd be unsafe, right? But if I need to stop guidance or whatever, I can do that without a strain while seated. One more thing to be aware of. The power button is in the rear of the Zumo on the top left as you view it from the front. I could easily reach behind the mounted unit to turn it off and back on. I subsequently considered mounting the cradle either 90 degrees or 180 degrees differently, but I think at 90 degrees it doesn't fit, and at 180 degrees the display doesn't rotate upside down. And my security concern will be back with the disconnect button exposed. So that's it. I hope this helped some of you out there. It was a pleasure putting it all together. And this is me and my son wishing you happy trails and safe riding.